Hello friends, today I am going to discuss a very interesting topic, that is concept of evolution, in which we will see how different views and theories regarding evolution came into existence in different time span. The term evolution literally denotes the process of continuous change. The concept of evolution is based on a detailed comparisons of structures of living and fossil forms on the sequences of appearance and extinction of species in past ages, on the physiologic and biochemical similarities and differences between species, and on analysis of the genetic constituents of present day plants and animals. Our understanding of the concept of evolution can emerge logically and naturally from our understandings of genetics. This is not, however, how the concept arose historically. It came as a result of a large number of observations of similarities and differences in structures and functions of the various kinds of plant and animals in different parts of the world. It came from Charles Darwin's profound insight into the arrangement of the pieces of the puzzle of how these similarities and differences may have arisen. Evolution means an unfolding, a gradual, orderly change from one condition to another. The planets and stars, the Earth's topography, the chemical compounds of the universe, and even the chemical elements and their subatomic particles have undergone a gradual, orderly changes, sometimes termed inorganic evolution. The principle of organic evolution states that all the various plants and animals existing at the present time have descended from the other, usually simpler, organisms by gradual modifications which have accumulated in successive generations. The doctrine of organic evolution states that the world has evolved and not created as was believed earlier. The highly organized complex forms today were not developed as such and will not continue to persist in the same condition, but these complex forms are the outcome of slow and gradual step by step unfolding and branching process from the simple unorganized forms that lived in the remotest past millions of years ago. One of the major trends in the evolution of most plants and animals has been towards increased adaptation to some particular environment, and this has frequently involved increased specializations and complexity of structures and their functions. This gradual unfolding and branching has led to the origin of varied number of species both in animal and plant kingdoms. Let us look into the historical development of the concept of evolution. Charles Darwin's name is closely associated with the concept of evolution, and it was first time appeared in writings of ancient Greek philosophers. The evolutionary concept, however, has its beginning from early Grecian civilization. Since then, its entire delineation has coursed through different stages. Theory of spatial creation. Spanish monk Father Suarez in 1548 and 1917 propounded that the world with all its complex organisms has been created by God in 6 natural days. From the day of creation, these organisms exist unchanged. Greek theories. Several theories of historical importance were described by Greek philosophers before the birth of Jesus Christ. Some of the popular ones are mentioned here. Thales, between 624 and 548 BC, was the first to speculate on the origin of life. He believed that all living things came out of water and that the earth was floating in the water. Although highly speculative, the view agrees with the modern concept of the aquatic or marine origin of life. Anaximander between 611 and 547 BC went a step further by envisaging the idea of a gradual evolution from a formless condition, with adaptations molding the organisms in due course. He proposed that all living beings have arisen from a primordial fluid or slime to which they ultimately return. The plants and animals were formed as this mud dried. Anaximenes between 588 and 524 BC conceived air as the possible cause of all things. He also introduced the concept of abiogenesis, or the spontaneous generation of living matter. Xenophon in 576 and 490 BC, a pupil of the mathematician Pythagoras, identified fossils of water animals on dry land high up in mountains, indicated that the dry land was once under the sea. He correctly interpreted fossils as forms or replicas of organisms that had lived in earlier periods of the earth's history. Empedocles between 495 and 435 BC, often regarded as the father of the evolutionary concepts. The four basic elements, air, earth, fire and water, were acted upon by two forces, the love and hate, which cause the union or separation. All changes in the world were associated with different mixtures of the four elements. As a result, parts of animals were formed separately and they united at random under the influence of love over hate. The forms formed as a result were mostly monsters and unviable, but a few could survive. Thus, this theory had the germ of the theory of natural selection. Aristotle, in between 384 and 322 BC, a great biologist as well as philosopher, worked out an elaborate theory of gradually evolving life forms. According to the metaphysical belief that nature strives to change from one simple and imperfect to the more complex and perfect. He had made a comprehensive study of the entire field of evolution and postulated certain significant principles. He had a precise idea of the laws of nature and attributed evolutionary changes to natural causes. He postulated the evolution of life from a primordial soft mass of living matter. According to him, evolution was a graded process beginning with plants, then plant-like animals such as sponges, then animals with a sensitivity, and lastly man. He anticipated Harvey's doctrine or Abiogenesis in embryonic development, and he believed in heredity, atavism, reversion and prenatal influences. Epicurus between 341 and 270 BC and Lucretius between 99 and 55 BC gave an evolutionary explanation of origin of plants and animals. Pre-modern theories. Evolutionists of medieval age were Bacon, Bonnet, Kant and Oken, who revived the idea of organic evolution. The trio of 18th century, Linnaeus, Buffon and Erasmus Darwin, is well known for shaping the idea of evolution. Francis Bacon between 1561 and 1626 reviewed Aristotelian idea and presumed that new species could arise from old species by degenerative process caused due to mutability in the species. He therefore emphasized on variations as being the cause for the origin of new species from old ones. He suggested that flying fishes are intermediate between fish and birds between birds and quadrupeds. Bonnet in 1707 and 1793 proposed the theory of preformation. According to this theory, the ova contain a miniature of the adult in preformed state. The act of fertilization provides initiation for growth and miniature grows into adult. Linnaeus between 1707 and 1788, the modern scheme of classification owes its origin to Carolus Linnaeus, a Swedish botanist. His great classical work was published in the Systema Nature. He believed in a spatial creation and presumed that a species are created by God. Buffon in 1707 and 1788 believed in the inheritance of acquired characteristics and the direct effect of environment on the structural modifications of organisms. Erasmus Darwin in 1731 and 1802, the English philosopher and freethinker, was grandfather of Charles Darwin. The name of his best known book, Zoonomia, in 1794 was coined to represent the laws of organic life. In his book, Darwin developed the theme of the inheritance of acquired characters. The struggle for existence that was elaborated by Charles Darwin was suggested in Zoonomia. Erasmus Darwin independently concluded that species descend from a common ancestors. He speculated on the variations in animals, the reproduction of the strongest and the struggle for existence. Modern theories, the contributions made by Lamarck, Darwin, Cuvier, Weismann and Huxley, etc. are of great importance, since this provoked a real scientific thinking of evolutionary process, and their theories are still being helpful, though in a somewhat modified form. Lamarck's theory of inheritance of acquired characters between 1744 and 1829. The most important of 18th century evolutionists was Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. His theory was based upon a certain propositions such as living organisms and their parts tend to increase in size continuously due to internal forces of life. Production of new organs in the body of organisms results from a new need and new movement, which this need initiates and maintains in the body. If an organ is used continuously and constantly, it will tend to become highly developed, whereas its continuous disuse results in the disappearance, and modifications produced or acquired during the lifetime of an individual are inherited. Georges Cuvier's theory of catastrophism between 1769 and 1832 is well known for his studies on a comparative anatomy and paleontology, according to which new species were created at the end of every catastrophe which destroyed the already existing species. The occurrence of fossils of different rock strata was accounted on the basis of catastrophes. He openly opposed evolution as a theory and supported the alternative view of fixity of species. A succession of catastrophes have periodically destroyed all living things, followed each time by the successive creation of new and higher forms. Darwin's theory of natural selections in 1809 and 1882. Darwin formulated the theory of origin of species by natural selection. It is based on some essential features such as overproductions or enormous fertility. Living organisms have enormous fertility and increase in geometric ratio, whereas food and space remain roughly constant. Thus, more individuals are produced than can possibly survive in maturity. Moreover, the number of individuals of a species remains roughly constant. Struggle for existence. Since the number of organisms produced is much more, there is keen competition for food and space and intense struggle for existence. The struggle is threefold: with the individuals of own species, with the individuals of other species, and with the environment. Variations and heredity. The everlasting competition among organisms compel them to change, so that they are more efficient in utilizing the environmental resources and succeed in the struggle for existence. Thus, variations are produced in the organisms which are inherited in the offspring. Survival of the fittest. The organisms which are best suited survive and reproduce, whereas the less adapted ones fail to survive or are exterminated. Natural selection and origin of species. Thus, nature selects the most suitable forms and the non-adaptive forms are eliminated through selection. Due to accumulation of new characteristics one after the other, the forms diverges from the older ones and consequently results in the origin of new species. Weismann's theory of continuity of germplasm proposed between 1834 and 1914. August Weismann, a prominent German biologist, may be considered as the first really original evolutionist after Darwin. He provided an alternative explanation to Lamarckism. His theory emphasized the remarkable stability of the germplasm. The environment was considered to have little, if any, effect on the hereditary material, even though environmentally induced modification of external characteristics occurred. The germplasm was distinguished from the somatoplasm and was described as the hereditary material carried from generation to generation in the reproductive process. So, any changes affecting soma is not heritable and disappears with the death of the individual. According to Weismann, the germplasm or genetic material is remarkably stable, but it occasionally undergoes change by spontaneous mutation. Victor Hugo de Vries' theory of mutation, proposed between 1848 and 1935. Hugo de Vries was a well-known Dutch botanist. He was the first to focus his attention upon the mutations. According to him, genes undergo a change called mutation. He discovered certain changes in considerable magnitude which behaved like a Mendelian genes. De Vries named such sudden hereditary changes as mutations. He was of the opinion that some of these mutants were new species produced at a single step. Ernest Haeckel theory of recapitulation, proposed between 1834 and 1919. Haeckel was one of the ardent followers of Darwin in Germany. He made the connection between development of the individual and evolution of the race, the biogenetic law, and popularized the phrase ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. That is, the development of the individual repeats the evolutionary history of the race. On the surface, the evidence for recapitulation seems convincing. The role of isolation in evolution was first emphasized by M. Wagner. He stated that any factor or mechanism which separates the individual of a species into groups so that these are unable to intermingle and interbreed constitutes the isolating mechanism and is helpful in the progress of evolution. When a widely distributed species is separated into two or more groups, each behaves as an independent population. It undergoes independent changes in its gene pool and is exposed to independent natural selection and genetic drift. It means each population evolves independently of others and gradually modified by the accumulation of changes in its gene pool. After a long time, genotype of the population changes to such an extent that it becomes remarkably different from other populations of the species and even different from the parent species. The result is that each of the population becomes reproductively isolated and in due course of time evolves into a distinct species. Therefore, first the geographical isolation is established, which ultimately establishes reproductive isolation, and finally new species are evolved as a result of splitting up of the old ones. The recent concept of the process of evolution is remarkably different from those which have been discussed so far. It involves variations caused by mutations, recombination, chromosomal aberrations, hybridization, isolation, genetic drift and the natural selection. All these preliminary forces combine to produce new forms and help in the process of evolution. Modern synthetic theory. Modern synthetic theory of evolution has evolved during the last century through an accumulation of facts and theoretical conclusions from a number of scientists. Dobzhansky, 1937, in his book Genetics and the Origin of Species, have emphasized the role of genetic changes in population in the process of evolution. Julian Huxley in 1942 and Ernst Mayr in 1942 and 1943 have explained the mechanism of origin of variations in higher animals and stabbings in higher plants. Wrench in 1960 has suggested that the forces operating for the origin of species also operate for evolution of genera, families and other higher categories. At present, the synthetic theory of evolution recognizes 5 basic processes, namely gene mutations, changes in chromosomal number, genetic recombination, natural selection and reproductive isolation. The 3 accessory processes also affect the working of process. These are migration, hybridization and chance in small populations. Othniel C. Marsh in 1831 and 1899, Cope between 1840 and 1897, Matthew, Gregory, Romer and Simpson in America, Woodward between 1864 and 1944 and Watson in England and Broom in South Africa have contributed immensely to vertebrate paleontology. Haldane, Fisher and Sewell Wright have provided a mathematical evidence to emphasize the role of natural selection in the evolution of populations. At the same time, when evolutionists were busy to seek plausible explanation for evolution, some scientists were trying to accumulate facts about evolutionary process. The evidence which support the evolution of living forms have come from the study of morphology, physiology, taxonomy, embryology of living forms and the paleontology. The recent techniques have been helpful in demonstrating the evolution taking place in the laboratory within short periods of only a few years. If organisms with a very short life cycles such as fruit fly or bacteria are reared for several generations in laboratory, new kinds of individuals are observed in the progeny. In the end, it could be concluded that the process of evolution is an ever continuing process. It has not stopped, but is occurring more rapidly today than in many of the past ages. In the last few 100,000 years, hundreds of species of animal and plants have become extinct and other hundreds have arisen. Although the process is too slow to be observed, there are notable examples of evolutionary changes which have occurred in past and recorded in the form of fossil inside the rocks. So, this is how various evolutionary concepts had been proposed and even some are accepted in modern times. Thank you.